immune hemolysis, and now we're going to talk about autoimmune hemolytic anemia a little bit, because they kind of go hand in hand. Some of the things we talked about, we'll talk about a little more here. Cold agglutinin disease, warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, and then drug-induced hemolytic anemia. So, autoimmune hemolytic anemia, AIHA, how you're going to see it, lots of abbreviations in the lab world, right? Patient makes antibodies to his own red cells. That's why we call it autoimmune. They make antibodies to themselves. Coated red cells then become hemolyzed. That's where you get the hemolytic anemia piece. Seldom is this going to be a primary disease. It's often going to be secondary to other things, oftentimes infections. Leukemias, it can be secondary to leukemia, especially CLL, lymphomas, T or B cell disorders, rheumatoid disorders. Most of the time, we're going to see this for viral infections and mycoplasma pneumonia, though, is where we're going to see it most of the time. But if we have a patient going through chemo, have a patient that has cancer, has lymphoma, leukemia, things like that, you always want to look that direction. But most of the time, it's just due to general things that we don't know. Unknown origin, usually a virus somebody gets. You guys, I'm sure, have heard about some of this stuff going on. You get, they're linking more and more of this autoimmune stuff to random viruses that we don't even know what they are or where they're at. So cold agglutinin disease is caused by auto-anti-big I. Why is that a problem?
Everybody has it.
Everybody has it, right? That becomes kind of a big problem. All adult cells have big I. Auto-anti-I is found in a lot of people. Most of the time it's going to be harmless. It's an IgM. It likes cold. So most of the time we're not going to see too much of a problem with it because it likes room temperature of 4 degrees, right? However, it becomes problematic and pathogenic if it's present in a really high titer, they have a lot of it, or it becomes reactive in warmer temperatures. So if it's reactive and closer to the 30 to 37, now we have problems, especially in Wisconsin, right? How often are our hands not in gloves? How often do we not have earmuffs on, or hats, things like that, right? I hate hats, I hate earmuffs, so most of the time in the wintertime my ears are open. And I know I'm not alone in that route. So that becomes a problem in Wisconsin. Oftentimes we see this associated with Raynaud's, mycoplasma pneumonia infections, and lymphoproliferative disorders is when we're going to see this. So what happens in cold agglutinin disease, the patient's blood is going to cool in the fingertips, in the earlobes. Oops, we left the door open, didn't we? They get their big food delivery every week during our lecture. Fingertips, toes, earlobes, tips of the nose. Have you guys ever noticed my blue nose? I always laugh with my mask on. It kind of kept my nose warm, but my nose gets blue. And I didn't realize it until I looked in the mirror one time and said, oh my gosh, my nose is blue. And somebody says, your nose is always blue. I'm like, it is? You know, I just had never paid attention. So you tend to have these problems where the circulation gets to these outer areas. What happens in these situations, and the IgM is going to coat the red cells. As the red cells cool down, IgM, complement likes it, right? It's going to activate the complement. The complement then is going to proceed through MAC, and it's going to cause cell destruction. The cells are going to hemolyze in the circulation. You're going to end up with red urine. You're going to have anemic, chronic fatigue. Thankfully, mine's not that bad. I don't have any of those. I just get the blue nose and fingers, but nose mostly. As blood cools down in a test tube, same thing is going to happen. The IgM is going to coat the cells, cause them to agglutinate. We can't get accurate cell counts. We put it through the hematology analyzer, and the cell counts get all goofy. Can't get accurate blood bank results because everything's agglutinating all the time. This is the kind of reaction we're going to get. Everything's a 4+. Screens, 4+ intermediate spin, and then it gets a little bit better at AHG, but it doesn't warm all the way down because it only goes to a 3. So to fix problems with cold agglutinins, this is where we do the pre-warm. I've talked about it a couple times. We have a pre-warm procedure. We don't actually do this anymore in the lab. It's very, very klutzy, takes a lot of time. Pretty much though, we're warming the saline, and you pre-warm everything before you mix it all together. So you're mixing it and testing it warm as opposed to at room temperature. You skip the immediate spin steps. You skip the PEG or the list, anything that's going to cause problems. When you do that, we're going to do a 37-degree wash of our cells. We're going to pre-warm our serums, and we can actually get a blood type. We skip the immediate spin, just do a pre-warm AHG, wash it with the warm saline, and it all turns up negative. Cold agglutinins in gel, we talked a little bit about gel, I kind of skipped over it some, but what happens is you get this mixed cell reaction. So what happens here, in gel, this is all AHG, it's like this column of gel, it's like little bubbles. And what happens is cells agglutinate, they don't go down. If cells are individual, they work themselves down. So that's kind of what it looks like. Gel has a lot of problems. A lot of places have gotten away from it because of all the problems. If you get a situation like this, you have to do everything in a tube anyway. DAT, all tubes may be positive if washed with cold saline. The IgM is going to coat, it's going to agglutinate everything, including the saline control. Everything's going to be positive. To fix it, we're going to repeat it using 37-degree saline. May still be positive for complement, but this becomes valid if the saline control is good now. Treatments, things we do, we have to transfuse blood through a warmer. We can't just transfuse the blood right in like normal at room temperature. We've got to put it through a warmer to warm it up to body temperature, because if it's cold when it hits the body's going to have a field day. Keep the patient warm. This is Wisconsin. This is where we all probably wish we were going to be next week. Anybody going anywhere warm next week? Yeah. Very seldom. It's so sad. None of us go. We don't have time. I feel like we're pushed.
Sorry, I was writing something down, but I'm going to Chicago to go to NARBC, which is the largest reptile expo.
Oh, that'll be fun. But Chicago's not warm. I might get as far as Chicago or Milwaukee, but yeah. So that's how we treat it, though. We got to try to keep these patients warm. These patients don't do well. When they have really, really high problems and high titers and things, they don't do well in Wisconsin. A lot of these patients move to like Arizona to be warm all the time. Diamond-Flansteiner antibody, we did talk about this earlier. I'm bringing it back up now. You've learned a little bit more. Auto-anti-P. It causes that paroxysmal cold hemoglobinuria. It's an IgG. Microorganisms can make antibodies that cross-react with the P antigens. That's where we see a problem with cross-reactivity. Viruses, bacteria, all can cause problems. So what's really cool about this, we talked about this before, it has the biphasic characteristics. So antibody coats the patient's cell at colder temperatures. The coated cells are hemolyzed once they warm up. So this, remember we talked about this when we talked about P way back when? This is the diagnostics for it. So we're going to mix the patient's cells and serum. We're going to incubate it first at 4 degrees. We should see no hemolysis. Then we're going to warm it to 37, and then all the antibody-coated cells should hemolyze. It's more of a reference lab thing. Warm, oh, that's the only one I had. I don't have the other ones for that. Warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, WAIHA, W-A-I-H-A. It's more common than cold agglutinin disease, often secondary to a CLL or a B-cell lymphoma. It's an IgG autoantibody. Usually it's going to be a pan-agglutination, but that means it's going to agglutinate everything. Everything turns positive. Occasionally it's going to show anti-E specificity, but the patient is E positive. So remember when we talked about little e, I said when we do see anti-E, oftentimes it's an autoantibody. That's what we're looking at here. So it looks close enough to E that it's going to look like an anti-E. Okay? Reacts best at body temperature. Doesn't cause as many problems in the blood bank usually. It's not going to interfere with ABRH typing, so that's huge. May not interfere with antibody screen if the autoantibody is only on the patient's red cells and not free in the plasma. It's when there's enough of it floating around where it doesn't bind the red cells we start having problems in the blood bank. Polyspecific tubes, we do a DAT. Our polyspecific tubes is a strong positive. IgG is a strong positive. Complement is usually negative. Once in a while it could be positive. Saline should always be negative. May cause some blood bank problems. May cause some blood bank problems if it's in high enough titer to spill over into the patient plasma. So if it's not just absorbed on the red cells, just not attached to the red cells, it may cause problems. We're going to see something like this for AHG. Antibody ID panel is almost always going to show pan-agglutinin. It's going to agglutinate everything, including the patient's own cells. This is our big clue here when we look at our auto control, our patient cells. When it's positive, it lets us know that there's something going on here. Doesn't negate any of this, because we could have, for example, like we could have this K could be hiding underneath these. We still could have something hiding. So we can't say, it's just an auto, we can ignore it. Because we could still have something underneath it. But at least it lets us know that's what's causing our problem.
Why is it agglutinate with everything if it's an auto antibody? Like if it wasn't secretly something else too?
Because if it's an autoantibody, if there's enough antibody in the plasma and it's hitting something that's pretty common on a red cell, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like a lot of times the little E specificity, for example, you know, there's one cell in this whole panel without a little E, but even it was positive, so it's hitting something else on the red cell. Problem with panagglutinins, as I said, it could be covering something. We can't just ignore it. We have to remove the autoantibody by a process called autoabsorption and then test the plasma. We do not do these in the lab. This is a real pain in the booty. I've done a couple demos in the past to get it to work, and the demos never would work. So what we do, it's kind of a cool process though. So what we do, all antigen sites of the patient's cells are saturated with autoantibody, but the patient is making so much autoantibody that it's spilling over into the plasma. So these are red cells coated, but there's still a lot of it in the plasma. So what we do is we're going to remove the antibodies coating the cells to make room for the antibodies in the plasma to reattach. So we're going to incubate the patient's plasma with his treated cells. Autoantibodies will react with the patient's cells, and the alloantibodies present will remain in the plasma. So what we do here, here's some pictures. Step one, we're going to centrifuge the patient's sample, separate the plasma and the cells. Okay? Antibody-coated cells here, all the extra plasma here. We don't know if this is just the auto, if there's some allo sticking in there. So then what we do, we use one of these Z-Zap or Worm, it's a sulfur hydro reagent, and we use them to coat the red cells, and those are going to destroy the antibodies that were attached to the red cells, but they're not going to destroy the red cells. So now, all these antibodies, all these antigens, all these cells are now antibody-free, nice and clean, and now they can absorb more of the autoantibody. We've opened up all these sites. So now we add all the plasma back in. We'll wash away the reagent, add the plasma back in, let it incubate for an hour. During that incubation, all the autoantibodies are once again reacting with those cells. And now hopefully we've opened up enough of those antigen sites for them to absorb out all the autoantibodies in the patient's plasma. So then we're going to test the absorbed plasma against the antibody ID panel because we've taken all the autoantibodies out. So if there's any alloantibodies left, we're going to test them against the panel. A negative result means all autoantibodies have been absorbed and there are no underlying alloantibodies. If the alloantibodies are present, the patient's cells, you're going to be able to find them on a panel. You cannot do an autoabsorption technique if the patient has recently been transfused because they're going to have other cells in their blood. They're not just going to have their own, so you could accidentally absorb out alloantibodies because you have other cells, not just the autoantibodies. You get false negative reactions in the panels. In this situation, you have to send it to a reference lab if it's been previously absorbed. Some of the important things to remember about transfusions like this is still going to be your ABO. We shouldn't see any problems in warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, but ABO is still going to be our most important thing. Second consideration is the blood should be antigen negative if they have an underlying alloantibody. So if they have a history of it, even if you can't find it now, we have to make sure it's antigen negative. All cross matches are going to be incompatible because the autoantibody is going to react with everything. So all cross matches are going to be incompatible, so you're going to have to get permission from your pathologist to issue incompatible blood. It's never fun. So most of the time it's like a little statement in your computer, most compatible, least incompatible, something along those lines. You should not use absorbed plasma to cross-match because the autoantibody is still there. So you can't just say, oh, well, it's not there and use that instead. Many institutions are going to actually transfuse antigen matched blood. So we're going to type for DCCE and AK, just like I talked about at the beginning of lecture today, and we're going to give them matched blood for anything they're negative for, because we don't want more antibodies. We're only going to transfuse with life-threatening anemia. Thankfully, the world's gotten better with that in general. We are not transfusing willy-nilly. We dropped that number. It used to be like 6. Your hemoglobin had to be 6. I think we've raised it to, it used to be 6. I think we've raised it, I'm saying it backwards. I think it used to be like 8, and now we dropped it. It has to be 6 before you get a transfusion. Like if it has to go the other way, we want it to be lower and lower because we don't want to give blood willy-nilly if you're able to do it yourself. We're going to try to treat the patient with steroids, try to inhibit some of their antibody production. Splenectomies are always a possibility because it's going to cause problems. Spleens removing antibody-coated cells, which is causing anemia, and it's just going to be continuing to happen. Drug-induced hemolytic anemia, it's not really an autoimmune process, but it kind of falls in this category. The antibody is to the drug, not to the red cells, but the drug is affecting the patient's red cells to cause a positive DAT. Positive DAT is going to result in hemolysis and anemia. Antibody screen will be negative, but the cross matches will be compatible. So here's the situation: you got your red cell, or given a drug, the red cell attaches, the drug attaches to the outside of the red cell, and antibody is formed against the drug, but the drug is on the red cell. So that's what's really going on to cause the positive DAT. Classic drug for this, penicillin. Drug-induced complement activation, very similar. You got the drug plus the antibodies. The drug is going to go, the antibodies to the drug, it's going to activate complement. And then we're going to get complement positive DAT. Quinines are classic for that situation. Membrane modification caused by drugs. It's not actually caused by an antigen-antibody reaction, but the drugs act on the red cell membrane. It alters the membrane. Any kind of plasma protein they absorb on the modified membrane, and then DAT is going to be positive for IgG and complement. Cephalosporins are classic for this group. So summary, autoimmune hemolytic anemia is caused by cold autoantibodies, warm autoantibodies, and drugs. Cold autoantibodies may be causing typing problems. We're going to use warm saline for all of our cell suspensions. Pre-warm the back type and antibody screen for all your cross matches. DAT positive in cold agglutinin disease due to complement. Warm autoantibodies are IgG. They don't cause typing problems. However, they cause all antiglobulin tests to be positive. Your screens, ID panels, cross matches, DATs. Have to separate out autoantibodies in plasma from any possible alloantibodies so that they hide the alloantibodies. We have to be aware of that. Drugs may cause hemolytic anemia similar to autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Penicillin, quinine, cephalosporin, those are the 3 majors.